Good evening, I'm Cait McVey. This is your Spectrum News in 90.
A win for Florida Attorney General Ashley Moody, the incumbent candidate in this race.
We all know just how flood prone this neighborhood is. Every time there's a major storm event, we are down here covering flood covered streets, most recently due to storm surge from Hurricane Idalia. It's almost like she was just checking off dream careers. Both progressives and moderates here starting to realize maybe they're not going to get everything they want out of this. The right thing would have been not to kill her.
Not to kill her.
Almost jarring to hear you say the right thing was to confess because you could have gotten away with it.
Look, I tried to explain to you, when it happened, it happened.
Turning to Tallahassee now, the biggest development we saw this week was with House Bill 1. That's the bill to block kids under 16 from social media.
If you are to go inside, it is really picking up here. Again, I keep saying between now and 10 p.m. we are going to see the gusts of winds pick up here in Pinellas County. So if you don't have to be outside like we are right now bringing you this information, your best bet, stay inside, stay dry, and most importantly, stay safe.
The Green Swamp region of Florida. More than 500,000 acres. From wetlands and lush greenery to flatwoods of towering pines, an ecosystem teeming with wildlife. But cutting right through the southernmost part, Interstate 4. Tens of thousands of cars each day, making it almost impossible for animals to cross. Now, the push for connectivity, key to conservation efforts across the state. Jason Lauritsen is the Chief Conservation Officer for the Florida Wildlife Corridor Foundation. We walked with him through Colt Creek State Park in Polk County, part of the Green Swamp.
We are walking in a pine flatwoods, and you got an overstory of pine trees and an understory of saw palmettos, which are a really important food source for Florida's black bears.
Yet Jason tells us there is no bear population in the park. A bit of a mystery, he says, though shows us on the map one major clue.
I-4 comes right up through the center of the state, separating the southern part of the state from the northern part.
Construction began on the highway back in 1958. At the time, Jason says landscape ecology wasn't really practiced yet, meaning the migratory patterns of animals not considered, at least not at the level they are today. Take, for example, the Florida black bear, shown here in video from the F-Stop Foundation, a nonprofit that monitors wildlife activity. These bears leave their habitats as juveniles, striking out on their own in search of new territory. Jason tells us one such bear, collared by researchers in 2009, traveled more than 500 miles before it arrived at I-4.
It appears as though he would have continued north if he could. He spent 4 days bouncing around against the edge of I-4 before finally giving up and heading back south.
Other animals, a worse fate. FWC data shows thousands of bears killed on Florida roads since the late 1970s. And then there's the endangered Florida panther. FWC reports at most only about 230 in the wild today. Last year alone, 21 were killed in vehicle crashes.
And over time, those species will blink out. And the things that we were able to see and enjoy in our backyards and in our state parks nearby won't be there for our children and our grandchildren.
But just down the highway, a plan in action. The construction of a wildlife underpass, where I-4 cuts through the Halachi Wildlife Management Area, part of the Green Swamp ecosystem. Brent Setchell, a design engineer with FDOT, met us out at the site.
So this is the crossing here. It's 61 feet wide. At the opening, it'll have 8 foot of vertical clearance on this side, and over on this side, it'll actually have like a little swale in there to allow aquatic species to be able to go through.
Like this here gator, slowly making his way to the other side, or a family of otters carefully navigating to safety. According to FDOT, there are 70 bridge-style crossings throughout Florida, and the videos from F-Stop prove they work, allowing even bears and the occasional panther to cross. This latest crossing is part of the interchange redesign project at State Road 577, and the third to be built just like it since 2017. when the FDOT design manual was updated, making it a requirement to consider wildlife crossings with every single new bridge design. Setchell showed us how it will work.
All the existing lanes will be removed out of here. They'll be set on the top of the 2 new bridges, so it'll become natural in there. And it'll have the fencing on both sides to keep the wildlife within the corridor and off the roadway.
This aerial footage gives a clearer view of that design. The cars and trucks speeding by will be redirected over the bridges on either side, and the animals will pass underneath, connecting the now divided conservation lands for the first time in more than 50 years. Which brings us back to that need for connectivity, efforts that are critical to wildlife conservation. The state is putting in the work with the help of conservation groups like the Wildlife Corridor Foundation, one of several to provide FDOT with input on the new underpass.
It's important that we, as the public and as conservation organizations, avail ourselves of those opportunities to weigh in and to pay attention and to make sure that we're really taking a look at the larger landscape.
One that's big and wild, stretching north through the Panhandle and south to the Everglades. And right here, at the center of it all, the green swamp of Florida. Cait McVey, Spectrum News.
It's sad that we are in 2020 and we still have not overcome this thing called racism. You still have to constantly prove yourself to the other race. Why is that happening? Why do we continue to have to say Black Lives Matter?
My name is Selma Bruce. I'm 71 years of age. I'm a native of St. Pete, born here, lived here all of my life. As a young child, I generally went to Tallahassee to spend my summers with my aunt and my cousin. On those trips, there was a big truck stop in Chiefland, Florida. It was called Bet's Big T. And I remember vividly, we always run around the back. And I remember it being a small area with tables and chairs. We were in the kitchen. We could see the cook. So as a child, 7, 8 years old, I didn't think about it because I was used to being around all blacks. But in retrospect, it was racism in its finest. We weren't allowed in the front.
My name is Michael Darrell Shorter Jr., 33 years old. As a black person, my reality is that I have to assume the worst and hope the best. If I am leaving work and I look like this, if I go to a grocery store, I walk in much differently than I do if it's a weekend and I have on casual clothes. I have found myself putting on like a polo and dress pants versus a t-shirt and, jeans, because the reaction is going to be different. Depending on what I wear will determine if I walk directly to my car because I'm walking maybe past an older white lady, or if I go around a couple cars because I don't want her to be startled because there's a black gentleman walking by her.
My name is LaQuanda Everett, and my son Quade was 17 years old at the time of his shooting. I got a knock at the door. It was some detectives. They said that Quade was in the car, and they said that the police officer was trying to stop the car, and he shot into the car. They told me, we must get you to the hospital. They didn't expect Quade to live through the night. At that moment, I collapsed on my couch, and I just said, not my baby. Quade did survive the injuries, but I will never get over hearing my son was shot in the head. I'll never get over hearing the details of how he was left in the car with no aid.
The social justice movement focus and what's happening today, I truly do believe is going to be a part of history.
We won't be silent. We're not going away. This issue is going to be dealt with for once and for all.
ever on Anna Maria Island. It terrifies me. There wasn't anybody that could help her. And now she's gone.
There's something about the sound of waves crashing along the shore. A signal to those passing by that this is a piece of paradise.
She just loved being a part of Anna Maria.
And it seemed the feeling was mutual. Many on the island counted themselves a friend of Sabina Musso-Buehler.
She was my boss at the Trade Winds and Tortuga resorts on Anna Maria Island. She always wanted to have her own resort, so they purchased Haley's, and they made it into something so fun and retro, and I mean, people just loved it.
Hello, welcome to Haley's Motel. Please join me for a tour.
Nancy Ambrose remembers how happy Sabina and her husband were, but while their business thrived, their marriage did not. Better off as friends, Nancy recalls, and they both moved on.
And she was feeling good about herself, and you know, everything was kind of coming together. And then here he comes. You know, I think he said all the right things.
A younger man named William Cumber, fresh out of prison for an arson conviction. But, says Nancy, Sabina was enamored.
I think she was in love with him. It was exciting.
That's the couple at a rally for Barack Obama in 2008. Nancy says her friend was ready to celebrate come election night. The plan was, after the election results came in, for you all to meet at a party.
Correct.
She never showed. Did you think something was wrong?
I just thought she'd left and went home already. You know, I didn't think anything had happened.
Until 2 days later, when Sabina didn't show up for work either.
She would not do that. No. Mm-mm. She was so dependable. I knew something was wrong.
Missing for 7 long years. Early on, investigators questioned this man, Robert Corona, found driving Sabina's car 2 days after she disappeared. But it turned out he was a car thief, not a killer, who took the Pontiac Sunbird after finding it abandoned, keys still in the ignition. And then there was Sabina's estranged husband, Tom Buehler, who had not 1, but 2 life insurance policies on his wife. But rather than suspicious, Assistant State Attorney Art Brown calls it standard business practice. After all, the two still owned a hotel together and were good friends. Instead, Brown says investigators had their sights set on the new man in Sabina's life.
Mr. Cumber was always the most likely suspect. He was the last person known to have been with Sabine. They had argued. You also had her blood being found on the couch. You had his blood on the floor of that same apartment.
Enough evidence to finally, years later, make an arrest. Why it took so long, we couldn't get an answer. The Manatee Sheriff's Office refused to comment. But faced with a murder trial, William Cumber took a deal. He not only confessed, but led investigators to Sabina's body.
She said that she couldn't do this relationship anymore because of certain issues.
What happens at that point?
I lose control. I hit her in the head. She gets scared and she covers her face with her hands. Reached and grabbed her throat until she wasn't moving.
She did not deserve anything that she got. Nobody does, but especially Sabina. She did not.
Buried just a block from her motel, right here under a beach pavilion the couple was known to visit together.
I just can't even wrap my head around it. I can't fathom that he took her there.
A clear view of the water, its waves sounding against the shore of Sabina's once paradise. In Manatee County, Cait McVey, Spectrum, Bay News 9. More than 1,300 miles of shoreline surround the state of Florida. And here on the West Coast, sugar sand beaches are met with the blue-green waters of the Gulf of Mexico. It's a tropical lake escape for beachgoers, more than happy to soak up both the sun and surf, though likely unaware of a hidden danger lurking just below the surface. Eckerd College sits along Boca Ciega Bay, part of the intracoastal waterway that leads to the Gulf. A good spot, says Professor Shannon Gowans, to collect water samples.
So what we're trying to do is collect up 5 gallons of water and see what's in here.
There's a very good chance she'll find microplastics, an emerging contaminant that is showing up in oceans around the world. It happens when our trash, things like plastic bags and water bottles, make their way into bodies of water. Over time, that plastic breaks down into smaller pieces, by definition 5 millimeters or less. So small, Gowans must use a microscope to detect it. First, she adds fluorescent dye, then places the sample under the lens and turns out the lights. Thanks to the dye, the pieces that are plastic glow.
This is clearly a plastic piece, and again, we wouldn't be able to see that with our eyes. It's only when we can use that dye and being able to zoom in and see these really tiny plastic pieces.
Emphasis on the micro part, a major hurdle, says Gowans, when it comes to addressing the problem.
We can't remove them once they're there and in these small sizes. What we need to do is stop them from getting in the bay in the first place.
While research on microplastics is still relatively new, NOAA calls this kind of marine debris a menace, with the potential to negatively affect the food chain all the way up to humans. Yet another reason to stop it before it starts, especially when it comes to one of the biggest culprits, single-use plastics. So far, efforts have been mixed, with 10 states enacting statewide bans on single-use plastic bags. But nearly double that amount, 17, have what are known as preemptive laws on the books to stop even local municipalities from doing the same. That includes Florida, the very first state to do so back in 2008, essentially banning bans on plastic bags, and eventually polystyrene materials like styrofoam containers. Since then, attempts to change the law have been unsuccessful, including this year when bills filed in both the Senate and House died in committees. Senator Linda Stewart, who represents much of Orange County, is behind one of this year's versions and calls it a disappointment.
Local governments should have the ability to make decisions on their own.
There was, however, a smaller scale win in that regard back in 2019, when Republican Governor Ron DeSantis went against the GOP-run legislature and vetoed a bill to stop local governments from regulating yet another popular plastic, single-use straws. The decision allowed cities like St. Petersburg to move forward with ordinances to ban them, forcing restaurants to use substitutes like paper, an effort led by City Councilwoman Gina Driscoll.
Thank you.
At first, it was an adjustment, but now, more than 2 years later, she says the move helped create a culture of sustainability.
What we started with the simple straw is leading to a bigger conversation and more reflection on what part each person can play in environmental stewardship.
And people really do care. According to a report released by Florida's Department of Environmental Protection, 93% of Floridians surveyed believe regulating plastic bags and containers is necessary. And the majority of local governments want to do just that. The only problem is, their hands are tied.
We're not allowed to make local decisions about what's right for the environment and, really what's best for our planet.
Including all that surrounds Florida, from the Gulf of Mexico to the Atlantic Ocean. Beauty we must protect in order to keep. Cait McVey, Spectrum News.
There's only one out. Time for the White Sox ace troubleshooter.
They called my father El Senor.
Pitcher Jerry Staley is sent to the mound by Lopez.
But no matter how big his career got,
The White Sox dance off the field with a 4-2 victory and the pennant in the bag.
he never forgot where he came from.
It was the 1920s and Ybor City was roaring. A bustling immigrant town with a thriving cigar industry. It's where Baseball Hall of Famer Al Lopez was born and raised, The son of Spanish immigrants, his 12th Avenue home in the center of it all.
Ybor City was kind of like a melting pot.
Al Lopez Jr., his father's namesake, sat down to share a bit of the family history.
In those days, everybody was poor, very poor. My grandfather worked in the cigar factory, but my father never was in for that, and he was lucky that he was a ball player.
Lopez learned from his older brothers, and the sandlots of Ybor soon became his stomping grounds.
They played ball all the time. I mean, in Ybor City, wherever there was a vacant lot, they played ball, and they ended up at Cascading Park. And he was lucky enough to be seen by some people, and they asked him if he was interested in being a ball player, and he said, of course. So he signed and started playing.
First for the Tampa Smokers at just 16 years old, then up to the big leagues.
Now observe Al Lopez. From high flies directly over the plate, he throws the mask.
Over nearly 2 decades, Lopez played for Brooklyn, Boston, Pittsburgh, and Cleveland, even holding a record for games caught that stood for 40 years. But it was Lopez's second act, coaching, that would solidify him as a baseball legend.
Now the Cleveland Indians are in town, led by the chief himself, manager Al Lopez.
Lopez led the Indians to the American League pennant in 1954 and was at the helm when the Go-Go White Sox did it in 1959.
Sharp fielding, and the Sox turn it into a double play.
Lopez finished out his career with the Sox, leaving the game for good in '69 as one of the winningest managers of all time.
When your father finally retired, he came right back here to Tampa, his childhood home.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a place he wanted to be. He loved this place. It was his family and friends, and he loved it here.
And the city loved him right back. There was an Al Lopez Field, an Al Lopez Day, and years later his likeness enshrined in bronze at Al Lopez Park.
He was celebrated here. When he was playing and even when he was managing, he always came back to 12th Avenue.
To his childhood home, still standing. Not too far from the sandlots that started it all. The legendary career of a kid from Ybor City.